So,
does anybody have any questions?
about, yeah, we should talk about that at the end. Yeah.
Now, I would like to know, to what extent has the Patriot Act enabled all of this repressive regime to, come to place? Yeah.
Well, I'll have a short answer. Steve will have a more developed answer, I'm sure. But my answer is the Patriot Act is just a symbol of much larger changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Patriot Act is a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is a much bigger problem. It's a whole attitude that runs throughout the entire government.
Couldn't you then ask to have the person that's accused released because they have not had a speedy trial and it's a violation of their constitutional rights?
Well, who would you propose you ask?
Good point.
Because the person you'd ask is the person that's holding the guy. It's the judge, the court. I'm happy to talk more questions about this and about where the problem is coming from. The problem is really that the laws have changed because there's a separate system of laws in cases that involve terrorism, whatever terrorism is.
And I think the other problem, too, is that it is secret. So much of this is classified. We cannot know it. We don't know the basis on which these opinions are made and the justice department. And all of this creates a whole different atmosphere that, as lawyers, as private lawyers, it's really hard to fight against.
For example, there was a lawsuit brought against Boeing, I guess, and because of their role in special renditions and having guys disappeared and taken overseas. And the Obama administration intervened and said, well, this lawsuit against Boeing can't continue because it would involve issues of national security. And the plaintiff said, well, what are they? Well, we can't tell you because it's national security. The lawsuit has to be dismissed. So you can't sue Boeing. And we can't tell you why. And won't tell you why.
And I'll just give you a quick example from the arrest appeal. When we took our appeal, the government, we filed our brief, public brief. Government filed their brief, public brief. Then the government filed a secret brief that we weren't allowed to see. Then the government filed a top secret brief that even the prosecutor wasn't allowed to see. Then they went in and we had a public argument, and then we were excused, and the prosecutor argued privately with the court. Now, what were they told privately? We don't know. We have no idea.
And what you're seeing is the construction of a national security state within the normal state. That's what's happening. Under the guise that terrorism is such a threat that it's necessary, which is the same rationale that the Supreme Court used in this Holder versus humanitarian law case, because terrorism justifies cutting the First Amendment very close because Congress said it's a threat, and we're not going to argue with that. Obviously, everybody knows it's a threat. Therefore, it's a threat.
But has that been this repressive, what you refer to, kind of police state within the state? How long has that been in operation?
This is a creation that has begun to expand exponentially since 9/11. There were elements of it that existed before, but it's now on steroids. Yeah.
I think part of, I called a lot of people to ask them to come today, and I expect to see more than this. I think part of the reason that people don't turn out for things like this is they feel helpless. Can we break this down to is there something that just I can do? And when you're faced with this monstrous regime, what can we do?
I think what a lot of us perhaps feel is that, in a sense, what the most important thing we can all do is to actively, hard work to break the Islamic phobia that has America in its grip. It only takes a few people to stand this is nuts. I'm more afraid of the government at this point than I am of my next door neighbor who happens to be Muslim. I like this person who's next to me Muslim. If you don't like them, the problem is you probably don't know them. Come on over and join. Let's have a party. Let's talk to each other. I think that kind of atmosphere will break this up. This is like when Kathy Callan and Mesa Bar got together and said, there's something wrong with this. We got to call a meeting, get people together. That's the sort of thing you can do very effectively to break the fear. I don't know how you do it in other countries, but somehow that fear has got to be broken.
I've got some other suggestions too, and I think that this panel up here was a good example. In some respects, I think the spreading of the stain is doing our job for us in that regard. Jess is a good example.
Yes.
I'm
so happy that...
well, actually, I mean, the real truth is, I am so glad that non-Muslim, non-Arabic people are now in the crosshairs. People like me, because I mean, we worked together for years. I could have been one of the subjects of that search warrant. It could have been me. Huh? I mean, and it always could have been all of us. But now it's becoming clear.
Yeah, now it's becoming clear.
It's becoming clear that it could be any of us. And when your neighbors say, well, you know, why should I care about this? Get just something to come talk to your group. I mean it. And have her come to Muslim groups, have her come to other groups. She can explain why this matters to everybody better than anyone in a burqa, unfortunately, or a hijab. Because it's true. And we haven't recognized it yet. But it's true. And also, your experience with the Secret Service, it's true. This has been going on with Muslim people for a decade or more, because it was after the Oklahoma City bombing, huh? That people were being stopped at the airports because they were Muslim. Because we knew who blew up the Oklahoma City building. Anyway, yeah, it was those people who, those Muslim terrorists in the Middle East. Everybody knew it.
Before then, they were Russians.
Huh?
Now we're Arabs.
We used to be Iranian.
Yes.
Yeah, Obama administration handled these terrorism cases different than the Bush administration, and this freedom movement that's happening all over the Middle East affect what's happening here as far as Islamophobia and terrorism cases as well?
Well, I can talk a little bit about the changes in the prosecutions. I don't want to claim that I'm enough of an expert in the effects of changes in the Middle East on the Obama administration in that regard. I've got some guesses, but expertise. With respect to the prosecutions, I think there have been some changes, but I don't know that they're fundamental changes. You saw, for example, the prosecution of the young man in Portland. That was an FBI-created crime, and they did everything to make the crime come about, and they found a guy who was gullible enough to fall into it. And that's an Obama creation. It's in his watch. The arguments in the humanitarian law project case that I mentioned earlier were argued by the Obama administration, and Elena Kagan, who we appointed to the Supreme Court, was the one that argued that a lawyer who represents a designated organization, who argues in favor, who is employed by that organization to represent them in the Security Council or in the UN, if they're on completely legal matters and they're them trying to change to be a peaceful organization, that lawyer would be guilty of material support for terrorism. That's the Obama administration argument. But in at least one of the cases that I had, when after the election, the Justice Department became easier to talk to. I have another case now, however, where they're being completely impossible to talk to in a case that they know is made up. And some differences, but not fundamental differences.
I see no fundamental difference between them myself. And I just think that, insofar as your other question goes, I think the whole idea of, walk like an Egyptian, it's really appealing. And maybe it gave heart to some of us here in the United States that weren't walking like Egyptians before. I see a little bit of maybe out in Madison. I hope I see that. People out there walking like Egyptians. But it's hard to tell. I mean, I don't know if there's anything direct. It's just the power of the people.
I think I agree with Steve on that. Of course, one always remains hopeful, but we have to remember that the Pentagon, as I understand it, the musicians in Pentagon bands are greater in number than the entire staff of the State Department. It's an interesting comparison to contemplate. You want to do the,
But the
can we do the...
band isn't the one that worries us.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think this is just
hold on,
Yeah, I don't see this just as an anti-Muslim issue. I see Hispanic people being racially profiled as well.
That's true.
It's anti-other, and you make a perceived enemy out of just about anybody. Racism is like a carousel in my view. It just goes round and round, and it's your turn for a while as the Iranians or the Muslims or it's horrible like that. I think there's something. 287G is a detainee law where you can use your local prisons to house people that you grab off the street. And this is something that exists in many areas, and I know the Hispanic community, the immigrants in our state are trying to not allow that to be in many areas, to be able to just it's a money-making thing to use your local jails to house people that are racially profiled and detained. We don't have that here, they have it in Miami, so that would be one thing I think people should be advocating against, is use of local jails for that kind of thing, for any kind of person, not just for Muslim people.
Yeah, that's using local jails for federal detainees. Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that I want to start doing is recognizing precisely your point that all these different groups are being targeted in different ways by different organizations. The African Americans are upset with the local police, Latinos, immigrants are upset with immigration, and Muslims are upset with the FBI. But it's all basically on an issue of being profiled, of being treated differently because of their religion or their orientation or ideology. And so I think just like we've been trying to write up the stories about the Muslims, we have to write up stories about all these people. Now we're talking about thousands and thousands of stories, so this is going to take some creative writing. But we have to start telling those stories, because all of those stories are coming out of the same mindset, the same attempt to control. And unless we can understand that, unless we can use language that allows these groups to talk with each other, we will not, it will be a sort of a divide and conquer. One group can say, oh, that's just a Muslim thing, we don't have to worry about that. As though somehow what happens to the Muslims doesn't affect what happens to the immigrants, doesn't happen to the rest of us, to the peace activists. And we've got to fight that idea and say, no, we have to frame the issue in a way that will say, all of these people are being profiled and targeted and treated differently. And it's because of a desire on the part of the government overall to control them and to repress any attempt to break out with their own ideology. And it's wrong. There's just no excuse for it.
Let's talk concretely a little bit about the problem of learning to just say no. It's really hard. And it's a problem that I faced myself and failed. There was a time when a police officer came up to me and said, "What's going on here?" And I thought I could give a rational explanation about what was going on here. And based on my rational explanation of what was going on here, I found myself in handcuffs and in jail for the weekend.
Under what charge?
I don't think we have to go into that.
Now we learn.
Because the natural reaction was for me to respond to you like a human being and answer your question in a way that, of course, would be reasonable. But if you're an officer, you're not a human being. You're an agent of the government whose job it is to reduce people to custody and to get information that you will use on behalf of the government, whether it's in my interest or not. And the best thing for me to do when you ask me a question like you just did is not to put anything into your hands that you can use in a way that I can't predict or expect.
And can I just sort of interject here to give an example? If you talk to a federal agent and you say something, let's think they come down for an interview, and typically they will have you in the room with 2 other agents, and it is never recorded. And at the end of this, if their version of what you said differs with the version that you said, you can be charged with lying to a federal officer, which is a very serious crime. If it happens to do with a terrorism investigation, they can apply the terrorism enhancement. You can end up in jail for, say, 10 years. This is a very serious problem, and I've on some occasions have talked to FBI agents. I have said, will this be recorded? I say, no, of course not. We never record these things. And I say, and will it be 2 of yours word against what my client is going to be saying? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, then why would anybody go down and do that? Why would you do that?
Because you get in this position where you feel like, oh, if I don't say something, they're going to suspect me. And it's normal and natural, and I would feel that way myself. And so what you have to say to make yourself feel better, to make sure that you're not, acting like you're suspicious, is you have to say, I'd really like to talk to you. But this guy said that because there's this federal statute that I can't talk to you, I've got to have a lawyer present when I do, and so call him, or you have to have a lawyer present. You can't do what you did. You cannot do what you did, and for the reason that Steve said. Let me give you an example of how bad it is. I have a client who was picked up in his own home, and they put him in a car, and they drove him 3 hours north. This is a Muslim guy, Somali guy, 3 hours north to a military base where they interrogated him for 3 days. They had a video link to the building next door and a direct video link to FBI headquarters, CIA headquarters, to the FBI office where they were investigating Moussaoui, because this guy went to the same mosque as Moussaoui, and they were trying to get him to testify against Moussaoui. So they interrogated him for 3 days. There was FBI and CIA agents in the building next door, and in D.C. and in New York. And during that period of time, he made some statements admitting that he had been in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. And this was viewed for 3 days in New York, in D.C., and in the building next door. And we got the FBI reports explaining what the guy said. Do you know that in those 3 days, nobody in D.C., New York, or in the building next door remembered to push the record button? Huh. Amazing. So all we have as a record is what the FBI and CIA remember what they heard or saw on the videotape. And when you, with the records on the Secret Service, what you said isn't what's in the files. What's in the files is what they remember you said.
That's exactly right.
So it could be anything. And so whenever you open your mouth with a federal official, what goes into your file is what they remember you said. And a yes could be a no, a negative could be a positive, and it's your word against theirs.
Yassine was charged, one of his charges against him was that he lied to the federal officials because he said he knew Mullah Krakar, but he didn't know him personally. Now, this was at a time when he'd been picked up, it was midnight, he was taken to the station, he was chained to a chair, and for the next 6 hours, the agents yelled at him and threatened him and browbeat him and attorneys firing questions at him. And at some point, in all of this confusion, they asked him about whether he knew who Mullah Krakar was, and he says, yeah, he's a famous guy, I don't know him personally. Whether he actually used those words or not, nobody can remember this, except the agent will say, he said, I don't know him personally. Some guy remembered that. And based on that one recollection of somebody in this crazy night that was all while he was chained to the chair being yelled at, that was the basis for a charge that he lied to the federal officer.
What should he have said?
Shouldn't have said anything. Wow. Do you want to try? Should we try this again?
Let me try this again. Do you remember what I just said?
I have nothing to say about that.
No. You're what? No, your best answer is, I'd love to talk to you, but this crazy law professor said that anything I said to a federal official could be a crime, so I can't talk to you at all. I'd love to, but the crazy professor says no.
That's too much, though.
Peter, can we try this? Just
Yes. Do the Monty Hall routine. Yeah.
Hi,
Something like that. That's right.
I'm Steve Downs, and I'm an FBI official. I would like to talk to you, just a minute. Maybe you could clear up a few facts for me. This will just take a few minutes. Would you be willing to do that?
I'd love to, but unfortunately, this law professor told me that I can't do that.
Oh, well, I mean, you're not going to listen. We're not going to be unfair to you, because imagine this information could save lives. We could clear up a lot of misunderstanding.
I'd love to, but unfortunately, this crazy law professor told me that I can't do that.
But one more, just have everybody chime in, all right? Do you understand that you need to cooperate with your government if we're going to finally get on top of this threat? Now, please, we want you to come down and just answer a few questions. I'll only take a few minutes.
I really would love to, but unfortunately, this crazy law professor told me that.
I'm doing this only because I want you to remember this. And somebody said once that if you do it no one will remember 10 minutes later what we said, but they will never forget the way you did it. And I'm hoping you'll remember this, because when it actually happens, you need to know the right answer.
And of course, the crazy law professor thing is designed for you to remember it. I hope you say something that is perhaps a little more. Say, I'd love to, but I'm going to have my lawyer present, or if you'd like to meet me in my lawyer's office, or let's do it at another time when I can have my lawyer here. What you'll find is very often they won't come back. Because when you say, I'll be happy to do it, but I've got to have my lawyer here, very often they disappear. Or you give them a lawyer's card and say, oh, I'm really happy to do that. Here, call my lawyer. They'll never call the lawyer.
That's been my experience, too.
Yeah, very often they just go away.
I want to address something.
Yeah, please do.
Because I have a lot of dealings with law enforcement, needless to say that. And there are some out here, I know, especially when public sympathy is on the side of law enforcement. Right now it is in our city, because 3 police officers have been killed in the month in St. Petersburg by African Americans, and of course they're collectively punishing the African American community now. At one point, cordoning blocks of the whole city off and doing checkpoints and searching house to house at gunpoint. Even children. It was every bit an Egyptian style or Libyan style kind of thing. 2 things. One, of course, your heart should go out to anyone who died innocently, but I think part of the problem is that we don't understand. We still have this good cop, bad cop mentality. Oh, they're not all bad. There's some good cops. I have police officers that I personally know that I'm acquainted with. Not just from them harassing me, but I'm saying we talk. But the fact remains that they're complicit if they allow police abuse in their own department. And we need to remember that, because in the African community, for instance, they understand that because of the persecution they face. But many of the people in the white community that I've talked to about this incident, they are, in fact, saying, well, come on now, there's good cops out there. It's only a few corrupt, if they'll even admit there's corrupt. I mean, on our own local community radio station, I went on the air and brought this out and you wouldn't believe the calls that came in. Some of the calls were like downright frightening, and this is a left-leaning community radio station, and one guy came in and said it's too bad the cops didn't find the 16-year-old and killed him with bullets and the clips were in. This is the kind of hostility that's out there from people, because they've canonized these police officers, even though this same department has killed several black youth unjustly, including shooting one in the back. And even in the left community, they're refusing to take a public stand. And so this is my concern. And then I had a quick question. What do you do when you're in a situation where they force your attorney to leave, like I alluded to with one incident? They forced our attorney to leave. And he's here. I don't know if he wants to comment on it, but they forced him to leave. So I asked a question in relation to that, and then I really felt that statement was important because no one wants to demonize anyone, but I appreciate the fact that you said that by nature of the fact that they're in a system that is complicit in the death of others and they say nothing. We need more Serpico's, if you will. Going back to the old Serpico situation.
Well, just because your lawyer isn't there doesn't mean that you have to talk. I mean, you can still say, I'm sorry, I can't, I'm not going to talk. If you're going to make my attorney leave, I'm still not going to say anything.
It's true that you don't have to say anything. You shouldn't say anything. You say, I'm sorry, I just can't talk to you. And the only way I can talk to you is if the lawyer's present, but I'm just not going to talk to you. But be polite, say I'd like to, but I can't do it. It's nothing personal, I just can't do it. I've got a right not to, and that's it. This is a difficult problem because, of course, police also have this extraordinarily difficult job. And I grew up in a neighborhood where half my friends became cops and the other half were arrested by the cops. The laws that they have to enforce are also very difficult, and so it's not an easy line to draw. But cops are also supposed to be restrained by the law. The idea of having to draw that line and do it in a situation where their life is at risk, I'm sympathetic and empathetic with that situation. But they do have the obligation to obey the law too. You can't break the law to enforce the law, and that's one of the tenets of our country. But of course, the public attitudes are difficult to deal with sometimes.
I had a question. Last month, I was in a national park, and I was stopped by the park police, supposedly for driving too slow, and they thought that I must be suspicious. Maybe I was trying to trap animals. So the officer asked me this big long line of questions that included, do you have a weapon in the car? Do you have drugs in the car? Do you have any kind of animals or illegal substance? I mean, he had a big long line. We had been driving all day. I was very tired, and he got very aggressive, saying that he didn't believe me because I was answering too slow. And it was a really, really unpleasant encounter. So I'm wondering, and I didn't expect there to be any political connection whatsoever with that. But is that a situation where you should say, I can't talk to you, or I can't answer the question?
There's a case called Berkmer versus McCarty. It's not in a national park. It's a regular traffic stop. The court said that they don't have to give you Miranda warnings in that situation. They can ask you questions. And my rule of thumb is that the Constitution means whatever the guy with the gun says it means at the moment he's asking you the questions. Armed officers have a certain amount of leeway, and I'm guessing this park officer probably was an armed person. And he may have been pushing what was reasonable under those circumstances, but the things we're talking about are situations where a person is in a custodial situation where they're being investigated for a crime in a more direct way. And in that situation, I think you'd probably be well advised not to try and get out of the situation gracefully. If you, however, were taken into some custodial facility and questioned in that facility, then I would say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. You know, that those circumstances, I think you'd be well advised then to start insisting on your right to a lawyer. But until it got to that point, I think both of you giving things an opportunity to cool down would probably be the best way to proceed.
All right, thanks.
Maybe one more question.
You choose. We've had a couple hands up here, right? I'm not in the choosing.
Okay, well, if there's 2 hands up, go with 2 questions, and then we'll finish.
Yeah.
I don't know who the 2 are, so.
It has to do with traveling. If we're pulled over by like security, like FBI or whatever, to go through our stuff, are we required to talk to them? Because I mean, they come and they ask. I mean, and they try to manipulate the words that you're saying, especially when it comes to do with money. And where are you taking the money and going overseas, and who are you giving it to? Like, are you required to tell them? And
where are you when this is happening? Are you
at
at
the
customs?
airport, boarding the airplane?
Boarding the airplane.
Yeah.
Is this a domestic flight or international? International flight. Yeah. If you're in an international situation, this is going overseas.
Going overseas.
Where are you? You're in the U.S.
I'm in the U.S. I was in New York. I was boarding the flight on Jordan. They wouldn't let me board. They took me to the side. They withdrew all my stuff and they took the money. They counted it. They wrote down how much I had. Then they found like $40 in my carry-on bag.
$40?
Well, because I had went out with my friend and
Yeah,
I
but
wanted to pay.
$40 seems like it's like.
Well, plus the other money I was carrying, but I didn't say that I had $40 in my carry-on bag. That my friend put in because she wouldn't let me pay for the cab.
Okay, but it's
So she tried to manipulate it, saying that I was trying to hide money in my carry-on.
Okay, hold on for a moment. This is, I think what we should talk about this is kind of specific to the exact situation you were in, and I think probably that's not a general enough question. I think you and I probably should sit down and talk about it. The question is whether you can be pulled aside. This is when you went through the security check?
It was right before I got onto the plane.
Okay, so you'd already been through the security check, and someone just pulled you aside for reasons you don't know?
Yes.
And then asked you questions?
Mm-hmm.
This is an FBI agent then?
Yes.
Okay. And then said they wanted to ask you a question about how much money you were carrying, or they went through your bags again, or what?
Yeah, they went through my bags. They checked everything, like my jeans, my shoes, my socks.
Okay.
Like
Well, as far as getting on the plane is concerned, then there's once you're getting on a plane, then they can search you and do everything for security. And that's okay, because that as you're getting on a plane, the security checks that they can do. As far as going through the contents of your wallet and the cash, I'm not sure about that. But getting on a plane is a completely different situation than when you're being stopped or interrogated in normal everyday life, because the plane situation has this additional security stuff to it, and also there are border issues, which I'm not sure I understand well enough to be able to comment on. I know as far as your personal, what you've got on your body and what you've got in your purse that might be theoretically dangerous, that they can check, because that has to do with security on the plane. But as far as the money in the purse and the money in the wallet, I don't know.
But this raises a sort of interesting question, because sometimes you're in a situation like you're in where basically the FBI can come up to you and say, lady, if you don't talk to me, you're not getting on that plane.
Right.
And so the question is, do you say, sorry, this crazy professor told me not to talk to the FBI unless my lawyer is present, and they'll say, fine, then you're not going to go off to Jordan, take a hike.
Right.
And that's a real tough one. You got to sort of figure out where they're going with this, and if it looks like they're going in the wrong direction, at some point you got to stop. And I don't know.
That's
They
been
made
a normal
me sign a
practice.
paper, they made me do all this stuff. I honestly, like, they're like, in order for you to get on the plane, you have to sign your testament to somebody.
Well, the situations that we're talking about here from a legal standpoint are actually two different situations. And from the experience, it probably doesn't seem like they're very different. But when you're talking about someone coming up to your house, knocking on the door, a situation where you're not getting on the plane, getting on the plane is a different legal situation than being stopped on the road or having somebody come up knocking on your door, because you're in a special security situation when you go through the security gate. And you're getting on a plane, so there's a special security justification they have. Now the targeting, picking out you as opposed to someone else for special attention, that's kind of a profiling issue. And then the question is how far they can go once they've targeted you. And then you having to decide whether you're going to play along with it or not, with the risk of not getting on the plane. And of course there have been a lot of folks who are Muslim who have not been allowed to get on the plane because they've been targeted. That happens not infrequently.
So could I be detained if I refuse to answer that question?
When it has to do with plane security, you're in their hands. I mean, that's the practical effect of it, because if they're going to say plane security trumps everything, and we're not going to let you get on the plane if we don't, if we have some concern about whether you are a danger on the plane or not, and they can make up anything about whether you're a danger to get on the plane. And then you're going to have to decide whether you will go along with it or not, because they're in a position where they can make something up that causes them to say, I think you might be a danger. May not be true, but they can say that.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you both. Thank you very much.